Leading Britain's conversation, Cross Question, with Ian Dale.
Hello, a warm welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. I'm Ian Dale. Right, let's kick off with this WhatsApp question from Vaz in Warwick. Donald Trump has said that everyone he's spoken to loves the idea of the US owning Gaza. Do you?
Look, let's start from the fact that ethnic cleansing has been going on for a long time in Palestine, at the West Bank as well as in Gaza. And what Trump is saying just ups the ante further on that. It's extremely disturbing. I want to go big picture on this. What is at stake here, and what I think Keir Starmer has not adequately defended to date, is the concept of the rule of law itself, and the question of whether might makes right, or whether we go back to might-based societies, or whether we maintain some kind of rules-based international order. The question for the kind of world that we thought we inhabit has become, in that sense, existential. And the second way I want to go big picture is by saying the real deep tragedy of the horrendous situation now playing out in the Middle East is that these people are fighting each other and terrible things are being done on both sides, but especially far, far more to the Palestinians. Whereas actually, if you look at this in a long-term perspective, in 20 or 30 years' time, people are going to be struggling to live in that part of the world at all because of the continually rising temperatures from global climate breakdown. What we need to be thinking is not just how do we get to a situation where there can be a Palestinian state, but how do we get to a situation where people can be focusing on the real enemy rather than killing each other? Because sooner or later, that is what they're going to have to focus on.
If you take the deportation bit out of this, which I know you can't, but let's look at it from that point of view. What is wrong with the idea of redeveloping Gaza in a way that makes it a very different place to what it was before?
Well, I'm assuming that Trump's idea for Gaza is not we're going to build lots of lovely big real estate and hotels and whatever, and then we're going to allow the Gazans to return and live in those same places, right? There's long been a fantasy on the Israeli hard right of, well, ethnic cleansing and having resorts, etc., that are there for international tourists and for Israelis. And we have to be worried that there is a possibility that Trump actually means what he says, and it's not just a negotiating gambit.
But if you look at what he's done on tariffs, for example, where he's gone in all guns blazing, and it has had an effect. I mean, it depends how you interpret the effect, I suppose, but he is certainly claiming victory with Canada and Mexico, and the Panamanians are talking about the canal, I think, in some loose sense. So if he does go in all guns blazing, it does seem to have an effect.
Well, let's wait and see what happens in Mexico. Things could look very different in a month's time when that gets reviewed. But look, as I say, the real issue here is, do we allow Donald Trump to go along with Putin and Xi and so on into a situation where we are essentially losing the idea of a rules-based international order and allowing the presidents of powerful countries to dictate to the rest of the world what happens? And I very much hope the answer to that question is no, that we actually are serious about trying to preserve a rules-based international order.
It's quite difficult, though, when you've got three members of the UN Security Council, the three leading members, the three most powerful members in some way, maybe you can argue about Russia, but deciding to plough their own furrow. And that you think, well, what can a country like Britain or France or Germany or other countries all around the world, what can they do about that? But let's take a follow-up text question from Jane, who says, is Donald Trump a genius, gangster, or something else? And if I may, why are we not vociferously calling out this plan like we did when Putin invaded Ukraine and gave our support to Kiev? I'm not sure there's a real parallel there, but I suppose I can see what you mean. Emma?
I'm with you on not quite understanding the parallel. One thing I would like to pick up on, though, is when you say, who are we to allow this? Who do you mean by we?
Well, I was referring back to what Keir Starmer said this afternoon. I think that countries such as Britain, in concert with all other countries of good intent, starting with the countries
Sorry,
in
just
Europe.
pick up on that. So you wouldn't include America as a country of good intent?
Well, the problem is that right now, the United States is run by Trump and an extremist Republican Party such as we have never known before. And of course, there's many Americans who are of good intent, but in terms of the intent of the people who hold the reins of power right now in the United States, I think we have to profoundly mistrust them.
I'm just really trying to drill down onto who you think the moral arbiters are. So you don't think that America, under this current regime, is a country of good intent. You Do you think Britain is?
I think we could be.
You don't. Do you think France is? Do you think Germany? Where is your line?
I think that those are the kinds of countries, in Poland and so forth, that we have to look to more at this time. But the real point is, do we have a rules-based international order or don't we? And insofar as it's looking increasingly like we don't, we also need to think about how we look after ourselves in that context. And by ourselves, I mean in this country, but also other countries which are in similar positions of being smaller countries threatened by these larger countries. If we are moving back into a situation where might is going to make right much more than we've been used to, we have to be ready to adapt to that situation and have pretty damn serious contingency plans.
So it is really, what do you mean by might is going to make right?
What I mean is that Trump is basically trying to say, what I say goes. It's irrelevant what international law says, irrelevant what the international criminal court says.
But you should be able to pick who can decide that rather than the US people.
Excuse me, Emma, I'm talking about a rules-based international order, right? So I'm talking about the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, I'm talking about the UN, etc., right? These are the institutions, flawed though they are and failing, frankly, though they are, which we have to, frankly, try to preserve through the very difficult situation we're moving into.
No. Richard Holden is from the Conservative Party, Tom Hayes from the Labour Party, Emma Barr from Reform UK, and Rupert Reid, who is the director of the Climate Majority Project. 30-second elevator pitch.
So the Climate Majority Project, what we're for is for the broad mass of people who research shows very clearly care about the climate, care about nature, haven't been adequately represented so far. And what we're trying to do is to mainstream climate action and say this isn't about those activists over there. This is about all of us coming together as parents, as teachers, as business people, as local residents, whatever we are, to find our voice together and act together against this threat which is going to sweep us away. And
what does that mean in practical terms?
So it means all sorts of things. So one of the things it means, for a lot of people, what it's going to mean is adaptation work, resilience building work. Because, as I implied 10 or so minutes ago, we are facing a future which is going to be very challenging in terms of the escalating climate emergency. Our governments are not on this sufficiently in this country or any country. So one of the main ways in which people can get involved is by building resilience where they live, along with others. That means things like local food growing. It means things like disaster prevention. It means things like early warning systems. For example, I gave a talk recently in Ilkley on the edge of the Yorkshire Moors. Ilkley is famously a place where there is a moor. Places like that are going to be facing probably a lot more wildfires in the next 5 to 10 years than we've ever had before in this country. We're hopelessly ill-prepared for those wildfires. Unfortunately, local government and national government are not stepping up sufficiently to that. So partly it's about people moving to protect themselves against those kinds of threats.
Right, a question from Scott in West Hampstead. Should Britain be giving up its sovereignty of the Chagos Islands and paying the Mauritius government billions of pounds? And what signal might this give to other countries which lay claim to British territories, such as Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands?
So I'd like to take a step back here. What I know about the Chagos Islands is mostly about the history of British rule there and the way that the Chagos Islanders have been treated, which is pretty terrible. And what I find unsatisfying
They still want to stay under British rule, of course, which I find slightly odd, but they do. Generally.
Yeah, well, it's complicated. There's a really good account in Mark Curtis's book, Unpeople, of the way the Chagos Islanders have been treated historically. And what I'm anxious in this discussion and the political spat and so forth is that we don't forget about them. This isn't just about Britain and the British Empire and about our military bases and about Mauritius and so on. This is about people who live there and who have homes there. So that would be my priority, making sure that whatever the outcome of this, it actually is something that actually works for those islanders.
But does it mystify you as to why there was any impetus at all to change the situation, given that Mauritius has never actually held sovereignty over the Chagos Islands? I mean, it's, 1,500 miles away from them anyway. Why is there this rush to deal with it?
Because it's considerably further away from us.
Well, of course it is. But so what? So the Falklands?
Yeah, well, yes, and what's going to be the long-term future of the Falklands? I don't know. Will the Falklands still be under British rule in 2100? I wouldn't be surprised if they're not. Look, my point is, what matters is the wishes of and the decent treatment of the islanders. That's very different in relation to Chagos than in relation to the Falklands, because the Chagos Islanders have been seriously oppressed in a way that the Falkland Islanders never have.
Well, I think actually the Falkland Islanders might disagree with that, seeing as they were invaded by a military junta. Well, quite, because I mean, I do get the impression a little bit that Rupert's version of history is like, well, it only matters if it's the UK who oppress.
No, it's about us taking responsibility for our past mistakes.
Right. Okay.
Did you see that last week the courts came and said that Rosebank and the other one was illegal? Well, what I wanted to know, what's your panel's position on this, given that it could give a lot of jobs, but climate change says it could kill a lot of people?
So it's been reported that the Prime Minister and Chancellor are set to approve drilling for oil in the large Rosebank site in the North Sea, despite concerns raised by the Environment Secretary, Ed Miliband. Doesn't seem to be a very good few weeks for the Environment Secretary. Rupert, let's come to you first. This is your area.
Yeah, well, let's start off by being very clear on what's happened here. So Labour went into the last election saying there would be no new licences for oil and gas. And these licences have now been knocked back by the courts. So Labour, according to their manifesto, are absolutely committed to not going ahead now in Rosebank. But the signs are not looking good.
Well, isn't that being a bit semantic?
I don't think so. I think it's very, very clear.
It wouldn't be a new licence,
No,
would it?
It would be a new licence, because there is no licence now for Rosebank. The court has knocked it out and said, nope, that goes right back. It's back to the government. So there's really no way around this for Labour. If they want to stand by their manifesto commitments, they have to say no to Rosebank. It looks very likely that they're going to say yes to Rosebank. If that happens, it will be an enormous betrayal. Ed Miliband, who I know and respect, should resign if that happens. And really, this is a desperately worrying sign amidst a whole lot, as you say, Ian, of how far this government has retreated from what it seemed to be promising on the environment and on climate at the time of the last election. It's desperately worrying at a time when what we need is we see the world's climate, frankly, starting to spin out of control. If you look at what's happened recently in LA, if you look at the epidemic of flooding around the world last year, we desperately need for there to be some kind of leadership now on this, and it looks like Labour are not going to offer any.
But do you not accept, though, there's still going to be a need for gas and oil even in 2050? I mean, a much smaller proportion of our energy needs. But if we still need to have oil and gas, surely it's better to drill our own.
Well, firstly, that's actually not clear. If you are going to have any new oil and gas, then you want to take it from the places where it is the easiest to get at. And that is no longer the case in the North Sea oil fields. These are dying oil fields. This is a dying industry. The caller mentioned jobs. There is far more scope for jobs in renewable energy, in retrofitting houses, in the things that we desperately need to do, which governments have criminally neglected for so long. So the jobs argument is a red herring. The energy argument in this island nation with so much solar and wind and so forth is a red herring.
Shall we just introduce very briefly another aspect of this? It's a question from Rob. He says, do you think there is a level of protest that could be deemed as terrorism? Where is the line between protesting and terrorising the public for a cause? Now, this is on the back of the Court of Appeal, currently considering the appeals of 16 Just Stop Oil protesters who were jailed for up to 5 years for various demonstrations, including climbing onto gantries over the M25 and throwing soup over Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers painting. Very quick answers from each of you. Emma, let's start with you.
If it's illegal, then it should be illegal, whatever the reason you are protesting. And I think that's a very clear
But do you
line.
regard it as terrorism?
No, because in some cases, perhaps, but I think that the point is, if you're doing something illegal, it shouldn't matter the reason why you're doing it. You should be held to the same standard as everyone else. And that goes for Just Stop Oil protesters, and it goes for any other protest.
I'm sure you've been on one or two of these protests, Rupert.
Well, not Just Stop Oil ones, I haven't, no.
Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that you had.
The climate majority project approach is completely different from the Just Stop Oil approach, but I would say, in fairness to the Just Stop Oil people, these are thoroughly non-violent protesters. They're not hurting anybody. They're not.
They're hurting people trying to get to work.
They're not hurting anybody. They're thoroughly non-violent protesters. If they throw soup at a work of art, I think that's a really dumb thing to do, frankly. But it's a million miles away from terrorism.
Do you honestly think that someone who is being paid by the hour, who can't get to work, they are not hurting them and their family by preventing them from getting to work and earning that wage?
They're not hurting them in the sense of doing them violence.
So it has to be physical violence. So it has to be physical violence for it to count as hurting someone.
Excuse me, the question is, was it terrorism? If you stop someone from getting to work, that may be a stupid and unpleasant thing to do. It's stupid to call it terrorism.
You said it wasn't harming them.
I said it wasn't causing them hurt.
And it seems to me, from what you're saying, Rupert, that you kind of get that.
Yeah.
And your group is not going to indulge in this sort of thing.
We're here.
I can't think of a single person who's converted to the environmental argument by those sorts of activities.
Yeah, what we're trying to do in the Climate Majority Project is to be there for everyone who's like, look, I get that there's a real issue here and we've got to do something about it, but that's not the way to go about it. So we invite all those people to come to us.
Right. We'll move on.
Cross Question with Ian Dale on LBC.
Richard Holden, Rupert Reed, Tom Hayes and Emma Barr with me taking your questions. The next one is from James in Hitchin. Is postponing local elections political cowardice, as Nigel Farage has claimed? And are the mainstream parties running scared of reform? Well, local elections, which were due to take place in May, have been delayed for 1 year in 9 areas of England to allow the government's planned major reforms to local authorities to take place. The reforms will see small district councils merged with the county councils, which cover the same territory, to form one larger local authority. Rupert?
I want to take up the aspect of the question on running scared. I think the government are running scared. I suspect the Conservatives are running scared too. I think the really significant thing about the general election results we just had is that you've got a massive increase, obviously, in the number of Reform MPs, a huge increase in the number of Green MPs. It wouldn't surprise me, Ian, if you're still doing this programme in 2040. If you're sitting here not with
78.
Not with Tom and Richard from the government and the opposition parties, but with a Reform and Green Party as government and opposition. I don't know which way around they'll be. People are looking. Hang on. People are looking. People are looking for something different. We've seen that very clearly in America. We're seeing it here as well. These insurgent parties are going to get stronger and stronger, and that is, I think, going to be what the long-term actual debate is in this country. Do you go for something like Reform or do you go for something like Green? I think the century of hegemony from those parties.
I think we've just got time to fit in one more question from Paul in Bolton. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ian. I'll say it quickly. Four of the Labour rebels who rebelled against the King's speech last summer, they've got the whip back, but 3 of them haven't. So do you think it's time for these 3, led by John McDonnell, to reject the Labour Party, cross the floor and join forces with Jeremy Corbyn and the other independents to become the 4th biggest political party in the House of Commons? Because we keep getting told that reform's the only option, but how about we have a proper left-wing political party in the UK?
I think it's a very interesting question. It speaks again to this question of the possibility of new insurgent parties rising. I'll just make one specific point about John McDonnell. He is one of the MPs who, above all others, really gets the importance of and what needs to be done on climate. I think any party should be looking to get him, whether it's Labour or the Independents or the Greens or a new party.
Right, our fun question from Gemma in Putney. The Louvre has been coming under an increasing amount of criticism for the bad time that visitors are having when visiting it. Which tourist site have you been excited to see but found to be extremely underwhelming? Rupert?
So many years ago, I did my PhD in the United States and I visited the Statue of Liberty, and I've got to tell you, it is really quite small.
Thank you all very much indeed.